Sally Hadley dies, triggering a multi-million-dollar inheritance.
We were talking about a considerable fortune, considerable wealth here.
A battle over words written a lifetime ago.
He used words that expressly meant biological descendants.
When it's money falling out of the sky into your lap, you just shut up and be happy.
And a conflict that threatens to tear a family apart.
My mother could have taken advantage of this money. It made me upset. It made me want to cry.
January 2003. Following the death of Sally Hadley, letters from the Rhode Island Probate Court are delivered to 11 addresses across the United States. The recipients are 11 cousins, scattered from coast to coast. In Seattle, Washington, Suzanne Bayer is surprised to hear that she might inherit some money from a long-dead great-uncle, Art Hadley.
It was actually quite a big package, and I opened it and read. First sentence, it said, "You have been determined to be an heir at law of Art Hadley." And I thought, oh my gosh, and I think at that point I called upstairs to my husband, Don, saying, we're gonna be rich.
Suzanne's cousin Wilma in Wisconsin also learns of the potential windfall.
When I first found out that we were possible heirs to this inheritance, the first thought is like, what? I can't believe this, that there's this possibility of this money there that you just didn't even know anything about.
Wilma's sister Wendy Gay receives the news in western Colorado.
Good fortune like that doesn't fall upon me. You know, it's like a world of make-believe. You just don't believe that this could be true. Just something falling out of the sky into your lap.
Art Hadley is now the name on everybody's lips. Pastor Ronald Gay, Wendy and Wilma's brother, heard stories about his great-uncle's accomplishments.
I had some awareness of him, that he was an inventor. I had some knowledge of our family history, you know. Some of the specifics I didn't, but I knew who he was. And I knew that there was a lot of money there. I didn't know how much, but I knew it was a lot.
Art was inventive and entrepreneurial, and Rhode Island was the perfect place to put his talents to good use and make some money.
At that time, Providence was the United States capital of the jewelry world. He was very fortunate. He became a tool maker, and after that he started his own jewelry manufacturing company in Providence called Hadley Jewelry Company, and that was in 1905. When my mom died in 1982, I reached into her jewelry box and I pulled out an expansion bracelet, and it was gold and it was very simple and it really suited my jewelry taste. And my dad just happened to say, "You know, Suze, your great uncle Artie invented that."
The expandable metal watch bands, he's the original inventor of those, which the follow-up of that is today's, Spidell Twistiflex, things like that. That all comes from him.
Great Uncle Art made sure that his jewelry fortune would provide for his immediate family. He left behind 2 children, the recently deceased Sarah, known as Aunt Sally, and Thomas. Interest on the trusts afforded them a lifelong income, but they were not allowed to touch the original capital. Art's trust decreed that after the death of Thomas and Sally, the trust payments should end and the remaining money distributed to what he called his issue, or his descendants. But as far as the cousins are aware, Thomas and Sally had no children of their own. When Sally died in 2002, the 11 cousins were left as Art's only living relatives, all descendants of Art's sister, Una. Ron, Wilma, and Wendy belong to one branch of the family. Suzanne and her brother make up the second branch. Cindy and her 2 siblings belong to a third.
There are 11 of us cousins, and we figured since we're bloodline, that we should be able to inherit.
They start to wonder, has Art left behind a gold-plated fortune?
My cousin Cindy was speculating. She said, "I wonder how much money is in Art Hadley's estate." She guessed $700,000. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. But when we hung up the phone that day, I thought, no way. It's not $700,000. It's a lot more that we're talking about.
But it's not long before another letter puts a damper on their enthusiasm.
And about a month later, we got a letter that said, it is unlikely that you will be inheriting.
Apparently, there are two heirs who have a better claim to Art's trust. The family already knew that Art's son Thomas had married. His wife had two teenage daughters, Janet and Lucille, from a previous marriage. But what they didn't know was that at some point before his death, Thomas formally adopted the two girls. Thomas's adopted daughters are considered to be Art's issue and are eligible to inherit.
Our family has always felt that adopted children are treated the same as anybody else of the biological children. There's no difference at all. So if there's an inheritance, of course we would split it and equally among adopted people or the biological. It didn't matter to us. That's what we believed in.
Ron is not so eager to share. He believes the language to the trust expressly excludes the adopted daughters.
He used words that expressly meant biological descendants. First of all, the word issue in law has a very precise meaning, and it means direct descendant. It means biological. That's the meaning in law and all history before that. You can look it up in the dictionary. Issue is that which proceeds from something.
But the court doesn't see it that way. The adopted daughters are to get everything. The cousins are asked to sign away any rights they have to Art's fortune.
It's like having that bait dangled in front of you and it gets whipped away from you, like you're out there fly fishing.
So at that moment, that's when our wise old owl, Cindy, said, no, we're not going to sign.
As one of the older members of the family, Cindy Gay has a strong influence on the rest.
I adored Cousin Cindy. She was my idol. She was absolutely gorgeous, those pale green eyes, beautiful figure, and she would light up a room. She would flirt with everybody in the room. She just came alive, and I thought, oh, when I grow up, I just want to be just like her.
But Cindy also struggled with money her entire life, as her daughter Sarah remembers all too well.
She had a lot of financial troubles. She was in debt a lot with credit cards. She would even buy dog food on her credit cards and then couldn't pay it back and was just mounting all this interest. And we tried to work out something where I could help her out. But she was a little irrational sometimes, and she didn't want to listen to maybe my sense of reason because I was her daughter. I don't know what.
Cindy suggests they talk to an attorney. Wendy calls John Farr, a Rhode Island lawyer and an expert in trust and estate law.
I was in my Providence law office, and my secretary told me there was a Wendy Gay on the phone who wanted to discuss some litigation with me. I don't generally do litigation, but out of curiosity, I took the call.
Farr is fascinated by their case. Buried within the report from the court official are more details about Thomas's adopted daughters. He comes across one crucial factor: their age.
The law was quite clear that if they were just adopted as minors, they would be treated just the same as a biological child. So the legal issue that we were grappling with was the age at which they were adopted.
John Farr's discovery puts a whole new slant on the adopted daughter's claim.
And he said, did you realize they were adopted when they were adults? You've got to be kidding me. I had no idea that was happening.
Tommy had been married for 13 years when he adopted the girls. By that time, they were in their 30s and already had families of their own.
Why adopt adult women? That doesn't make sense to me.
For the cousins, the adoptees' entitlement to Art's fortune is dubious.
I don't think they should have been entitled to anything. If they were adopted when they were children, that would have been a whole different story. There's no way. This doesn't seem right that they should be able to inherit this money when they have nothing to do with the Hadleys. Like, do they have all the photographs I have? Do they have heirlooms? Do they even care? It's not even their bloodline.
The biggest thing is they were adopted so late in their lives versus all of us who grew up in the family.
To come back as an adult and be adopted as a child, it's really a stretch. Typically, adult adoptions only occur where there's a lot of money.
Their suspicion only increases when they find out the value of Art's inheritance.
Considerable fortune, considerable wealth here.
The cousins believe they deserve a share.
We were all in agreement, all 11 of us wanted to fight for this because we were indeed the bloodline of Art Hadley.
Their lawyer, John Farr, informs the cousins that the trust is worth an incredible $7 million.
I think nobody could believe that because how could somebody during the Depression make that kind of money? So we were talking about a considerable fortune, considerable wealth here.
This was not just some little frivolous thing. This was serious business. I think that's what really struck me.
As the family gears up to contest the will, they realize that the battle over Art's money began long ago with his children, Sally and Thomas. Sally Hadley died childless, and she was never married. Family stories tell of a tragic life filled with missed opportunities.
Family gossip has it that Sally was madly in love with Ed Finneran, and he was killed. He was an Air Force pilot. He was killed, and he was 23. She was 22 at the time. Sally went downhill after her fiancé died. She was in and out of mental institutions. She had some emotional problems.
She has a great smile, a great smile. You can tell, you can kind of see the fire in her eyes. There's very beautiful woman, very beautiful woman. It's kind of sad what's happened to her, actually.
Of all the cousins, only Cindy kept in touch with Aunt Sally and witnessed her slow decline.
She always referred to Aunt Sally as crazy Aunt Sally, but it was meant in a very endearing kind of way. She would have hallucinations and think that people were actually spying on her or wanted to get at her. And I'm not sure if it had to do with more like mafia kind of connections or CIA type of, espionage or what have you, but she had this real fear.
As Sally's mental condition deteriorated, so did the relationship between her and her brother.
They didn't like each other. So I was kind of like my brother and I. We don't really like each other. Always button heads.
Sally was a very generous person. She was kind and she was sweet. So I'm thinking she might have been a very easy target and an easy victim of her brother.
With her father's estate worth millions, the cousins speculate that Thomas wanted to take control of the family trusts.
He had in his mind, he wanted to get all of Uncle Art, his dad's trusts and estates. Why would he want to share it with somebody who was mentally unbalanced?
When Thomas married, his new family may have presented a perfect opportunity to control the money.
I think Tommy adopted the two girls because I think he wanted to keep all of his side of Art's fortune with his family, the two girls.
Would there have been an adoption if there had been no trust to inherit? I seriously doubt so.
There seemed to be absolutely no rationale for that adoption other than to try to make them heirs at law of Art Hadley.
The negative feelings between Thomas and Sally were mutual. She goes to great lengths to make sure he will not inherit from her personal estate.
Let me just read the 7th point. It is intentional and not the result of mistake or negligence that I have omitted any provision for the benefit of my brother, Thomas P. Hadley.
He was, quote, a badass brother. So obviously there was problems with their relationship.
But Sally did not have much money of her own. The real wealth is locked away in her father's trust. The cousins are resolved to fight for a share of this $7 million inheritance, but brother and sister Ron and Wilma are reluctant to join the rest.
There was this big push to, gotta hurry up and do something, but my brother Ron would just say, study the issue out and get to know the facts, but nothing has to be done right now. This is just a notice.
Each one of us should read the trust for ourselves, come to our own opinion, read the laws of Rhode Island for ourselves, and come up with an overall strategy.
He would encourage me to read this stuff, get educated, to read the trust. Every time you read something, your understanding grows more and more.
Attorney John Farr is willing to take this case on a contingency basis. If he succeeds, he will receive 30% of the cousin's inheritance.
And I got to think, that's just way too much. You know, nobody's worth that much money. At that point, decided I would go it alone. And it wasn't an act of disrespect or anything like that. It was a very carefully thought out decision. I knew it was the right choice for me to go alone.
It's just as well. John Farr believes they would be more trouble than they're worth.
One of my conditions is that I would take on the rest of the family, but I would not represent Ron and Wilma.
He told me the first time that he had spoke to Ron, he didn't want him on as a client, and I said, personally, I can't say as a blame you, because I wouldn't want to.
I just sensed that he was not going to be willing to take my advice. I sensed that eventually down the line there would be a conflict between Ron and Wilma on the one hand and the other family members.
John Farr turns to the task at hand, winning an inheritance for his other 9 clients. The 2 adopted daughters have hired Rhode Island attorney John Harpootchian to represent them. On their first meeting, Harpootchian insists that the 2 women are Art's legitimate heirs.
I asked him whether he was interested in discussing some sort of settlement of the case. And he made it clear that he emphatically was not interested and that there was no reason to discuss giving up anything that he expected his clients to inherit. It was a very brief conversation.
Harpootchian's confidence comes from a previous Supreme Court decision in Rhode Island. They made it clear that adopted children should be treated exactly the same as biological children. Farr is not optimistic about his client's chances.
I felt they would lose the case, but I also felt they shouldn't lose the case. That the law that the Supreme Court had imposed in this area was just wrong.
But the circumstances of the 2 cases were different. In the first, an elderly woman had made a choice to adopt an adult man. In the Hadley case, Art Hadley did not make a choice to adopt 2 granddaughters. He was long dead at the time of the adoption. And a long-standing law in Rhode Island prevents adult adoptees from inheriting from a trust when the trust maker has already died before the adoption takes place.
They carved out an exception which was critical to this case. Under his will, these 2 adult adopted daughters were absolutely forbidden from taking.
You have to follow it just word by word, comma by comma. But I could see quite quickly that these people completely fulfilled every categorical exclusion by the law from being heirs.
John Farr believes that to win the case, the Supreme Court will have to reverse their own decision, something that almost never happens. So Farr has to persuade the court that the Hadley case concerns a different issue, the potential for abuse of the system when adults are adopted.
So my pitch to the Supreme Court was that you haven't decided this yet. And it turned out to be pivotal. It changed the whole case. I had this clear sense that I wasn't really representing my 9 clients, that my client was Art Hadley, and that I was arguing for his position of how he wanted this case to be resolved.
Farr decides to write a fantasy brief with fictional court cases as examples, showing the dangers of adult adoption.
And one of the cases I made up was that the Supreme Court of the state of X had permitted a son to adopt his wife as a child and thereby inherit from his father.
Farr's long nights in the library pay off. He finds dozens of cases from other states that clearly show that adult adoption can be used to manipulate an inheritance.
I began getting into this research and immediately found a case in Kentucky where a man had adopted his wife as his daughter to inherit from his father. I decided to embark on a 50-state survey to find out every single case in the country that had dealt with this issue. The overwhelming majority of the courts in those states had decided the issue in favor of my clients.
Farr sends his brief to the opposition lawyer and hopes his theory of the case will make them think twice.
I have to assume that he did change his mind and change it quite dramatically. He certainly agreed to sit down and discuss settlement of the case and very quickly agreed to a highly favorable settlement for us.
Farr proudly announces to his clients that the adopted daughters have agreed to a settlement.
I thought, oh my gosh, this is real. This is going to happen.
But his fears about Ron and Wilma will prove well-founded.
And I'm thinking to myself right then and there that it wasn't going to happen because, first of all, it was too good to be true, and Ronnie was there.
The counsel for the trustee actually proposed a settlement where on that issue we would split the pie 50-50. This was extraordinarily good news. It would have been crazy not to accept the settlement.
We will definitely settle. Sure, why not? A little bit is better than nothing. Nobody in their right mind would oppose a settlement. And we were so willing to share with the adopted daughters.
Wendy suspects her stubborn siblings Ron and Wilma might not be so willing.
There was the but. He didn't know if Ronnie and Wilma would accept it. And I'm thinking to myself right then and there that it wasn't going to happen.
David Strackman, who represented Ron and Wilma, was very quiet. And I found out afterwards that he wasn't so sure that his clients would go along with this settlement.
Ron and Wilma are adamant they do not accept that the adopted daughters should get a share.
Myself and Wilma believed that this was legitimate property. There was a true solution in law, and the others, if you will, were what you call pragmatic. In other words, they didn't know if they were heirs, they didn't matter to them, but if they can get some money, get some lawyers, let's get some money and go on with life. But why would we have the principles? We read them in the Bible.
I remember him saying that the bloodline should get everything because that's God's will. God would want it that way.
My clients were, they were very, very upset.
Isn't this the right thing to do, to share with adopted people, the adopted women, as well as the bloodline? The whole thing just didn't make sense. I really wanted to share. Ron didn't.
It would have been really nice. He could have put his kids through college. Everybody could have walked away really, really happy.
Wilma finds herself having to make a very tough decision: take the money or alienate the rest of the family.
As hard as it was, I chose to follow Ron with the decisions that he made. When it got right down to it, I could not separate the truth from just getting the money.
Wilma was somebody that was hard to figure out, and I never could really come to a conclusion whether she was blindly following her brother or whether she was genuinely convinced of the rightness of their position and she was holding out for that reason.
I don't know why Wilma chose to follow the way that she does, because she doesn't strike me as a greedy person at all. but she still does what Ronnie says. Of course, that was through our whole childhood, too. Whatever Ronnie said, Wilma did. He would yell, "Hey, slave," or "Hey, hound dog," and Wilma would be right there. He'd tell her to go do something, she'd go do it. And, you know, she's a loyal follower of Ronnie.
Loyal or not, Wilma finds herself stuck in the middle of a family conflict that gets worse by the day.
My traditional role seems to be the peacekeeper. I was always trying to keep the peace between family members, and my mother would always sarcastically call me Pollyanna because I was always trying to look at the upside of everything, and so I just was very concerned about it creating a bigger rift between my brother and my sister and trying to figure out how to do it. And that is really what I was trying to do through the very first beginning.
Just like Aunt Sally and Uncle Thomas, Wendy and Ron grew up as bitter rivals.
He was a bully. He still is. I'm not going to bend over and do as he says, so to speak. He still tries to push me around. He finds out it doesn't work very well.
About approximately halfway through my high school years, I made a decision to avoid her at all costs because, you know, she could be violent.
He's a very, very intelligent person. Highly intelligent. Street smart's not too many. And I have to admire him. He's stuck to his beliefs his entire life and never backed down from them. So, you know, I admire him for that. I admire him for his intelligence. But he was a bully when we were kids. He was mean to me.
When Ron turned to religion, their relationship got even worse.
I'm not saying I did everything right, but, you know, there was the last few years of my life at home, I tried to do her right and stay away from her. And, you know, as we went through life, our lives went different directions. You know, my life is, you know, following the Lord, and if you will, it's just two totally different lives.
Like I say, we're like oil and water. We don't mix well. We don't play well with each other. We're from two different worlds, two different planets. I like my world.
The family dispute over the Hadley millions worsens when they hear bad news from their older cousin Cindy.
It was about 2002 that she developed breast cancer. So obviously, she had to have a mastectomy, and she had radiation, and she had chemo. I mean, she's had 9 surgeries at least throughout her whole life. So not only did she have, you know, depression, anxiety, she also had some panic attacks, but she had some serious medical problems that she dealt with her whole life. So one thing after another.
Cindy's precarious financial state does not make her life any easier.
I do know that the money from Art Hadley's trust would have benefited her enormously. She was at the time going through a lot of medical treatment. She was on Medicare. Some of the bills weren't being paid. I was thinking, my mother could have taken advantage of this money. My mother needed this out of anybody out there. It made me upset. It made me want to cry.
Cindy, as she put it, didn't have a pot to pee in. Any little bit of this money would have helped her greatly.
The family starts to put the screws on Ron and Wilma, settle the case, and take the money.
You're doing the wrong thing. You're drawing this out and causing tension, and you're the reason we're not going to get more money and stuff like that, and get our settlement and get our money now. But I could remember is thinking about President Bush. That was about the time of some of the biggest pressure he was under with the Iraqi war. And I honestly thought about how can a president stand firm. I just had an inkling at that point of what he must be going through with everything that was going on in our nation. Wow. It's hard to stand against the emotional tide. Things happen to people all the time, but the world can't stop when tragedy strikes.
Well, I was getting phone calls, I was getting letters. You know, if I was a nice man, I would concede. you know, Cindy's not going to enjoy her inheritance. It's going to be all my fault.
I can understand why he pursued what he did. He had a conviction and he believed in it. And so if you really believe in something, you're gonna try as hard as you can to make it work.
If you are the person that you say that you are, you know, being a minister, you're supposed to be there to minister to the people. Ministering to the people to me is also being compassionate and helpful. To me, he's in the wrong profession.
With Ron and Wilma standing firm, there can be no settlement. Attorney John Farr files his brief with the Rhode Island Trial Court, arguing that the cousins qualify as Art Hadley's biological issue. For Cindy's sake, the cousins hope that Judge Rubine will rule in their favor.
My biggest fear was that Cindy would get nothing out of this, and I wanted the money more for her than I did for me.
It got to a point we didn't think we'd ever see anything.
Now, all of the family's hopes are in the hands of the court as they wait for a decision. In March 2005, attorney John Farr hears the decision.
I sent them all an email, and up in the subject it said, "Bad, bad news."
Judge Rubine rules in favor of the two adopted daughters. He says they should be treated exactly the same as biological children and inherit the entire fortune.
When the girls won the case, I figured, well, okay, that was fun, that's over.
But Farr knows that the real test is yet to come.
I announced to them that the judge had ruled against them, but I also said that doesn't matter. You know, it would have been nice, but we all knew, all of the counsel involved in this case knew, that this case would ultimately be decided by the Rhode Island Supreme Court.
Meanwhile, the value of the trust is diminishing as the vultures start to circle.
The money just kept dwindling year after year after year. And it wasn't just because of Ron and Wilma, it was because the trustees took money. And there were some incredible charges per hour. I don't want to quote what it is, but it's more than a couple $1,000s, let's put it that way, per hour.
I have a feeling that if that was all probed, it's very possible that some inappropriate, behavior might be uncovered.
The case goes to appeal, but before the justices at the Rhode Island Supreme Court could hear the case, they insist on another attempt at mediation. John Farr hopes the mediator, Justice Weisberger, will persuade Ron and Wilma to settle.
I felt that if they saw that this was a well-thought-out resolution, that it had the backing of a judge, that would change their mind.
Ron is frustrated at the lack of progress. He fires his lawyer and decides to represent himself.
It became, if you will, an understanding in my heart that I would like to represent myself. I felt that I should. But too many people just sign everything over to the lawyers, and they put their name on a piece of paper, and when the money comes in, then they're happy, and that's all they know about their cases.
Wilma is left with no lawyer and little time for preparation.
And my brother had already been studying all this stuff and already been doing a lot of writing and working. That's his personality. So he was prepared for what was coming, but I was totally unprepared for what was going to come.
It was kind of hard to see Wilma get thrown to the fray, but sometimes we have to make the choice we know is right for us. To Wilma's credit, I mean, she got tromped initially, but she rose to the occasion.
Attorney John Farr is impressed by their performance.
They were extremely bright, courteous. They asked very astute questions, and it wasn't very far into the case that I thought these two would make great lawyers.
It was a little bit intimidating, but in what I had going for me is I knew my issue.
But the cousins are still at a stalemate. Ron is not moving an inch. His sister Wilma tries to change his mind.
And I kept asking him, I said, Ronnie, if it's money that's falling out of the sky into your lap, I mean, this is how the phone conversations were. I had to go into the bedroom and in the closet so that John wouldn't overhear the conversations because it made him mad.
One of the greatest griefs of me in this whole thing is I was not able to sit down and rationally talk with any of my family. This is what I believe, this is why I believe it, because the very minute I tried to explain to them what I saw in it, you know, the conversation was basically over.
I'm very good at hanging up on people. It works well.
During this course of time, I honestly couldn't really talk to her because I was not able to deal with the conflicts that we had. It was just a little too volatile, so I would avoid it. I like to avoid conflict. But even then, there were times I just had to listen to her, and then I'd get off the phone and I would just cry because I was so torn between what I was doing and what they wanted me to do.
You know, they tried everything. If I was a good Christian, I would do what they wanted. You know, if I was a nice man, I would do what they wanted. If I had any brains, I would listen to the lawyers, and a lot of, you know, implications that I'm, you know, some kind of a bizarre moron. It's just floating out there in space, and I got it all, yeah.
I say he's a very smart man. But some things just don't balance out right in his eyes.
As John Farr prepares to take the case to the Supreme Court, Cindy receives some bad news. Scans have revealed a large tumor on her spine. The cancer has spread.
We were pretty tight. And, you know, the sicker she got, the sadder I was. She was a tremendously marvelous person. Sense of humor that just never stopped.
She was ready to fight this cancer, go through the chemo, because she was told she was going to have to go through more aggressive chemo again. And then, unfortunately, within less than a month, she had passed away.
On October 11, 2006, Cindy Gay dies of a heart attack. Attorney John Farr meets his clients for the first time at the memorial service in Vermont. Ron and Wilma do not attend.
I felt bad, but there was nothing I could do about it. I knew what I was doing. I knew it was right. It was the right thing for me. I did feel bad, but, you know, I couldn't, other than feel bad, you know, what more can you do? You know, it's unfortunate people die, but they do.
As the mediation continues, Ron continues to defend his position. But after 6 months, as the lawyers have a last-ditch effort to break the deadlock, there's a surprising shift in allegiance. With $7 million at stake, Wilma is feeling the pressure to share the Hadley inheritance and take the money.
I'm not going to deny that I didn't dream. What would I do with this money if I inherited this money? I had a dream to pay off my daughter's college debt. I had dreams of donating some money to a place in Africa so they could drill a well. I had lots of dreams, getting my husband and I out of debt, and then we could enjoy life.
Surprising everyone, Wilma deserts her brother Ron and joins the rest of the cousins.
There were some tears. Wilma then announced that she wanted to settle. Ron publicly announced to the group that she was free to make whatever decision was best for her.
At that point in time, I did not know the issues well enough to have a logical argument for why I was doing what I was doing, but I also was very overpowered by all the setting and everything, and very unsure of myself.
I knew she got blown away by the lawyers. I knew she wasn't prepared. So I felt bad, I was disappointed, but it didn't bother me that I was on my own.
But Wilma's change of heart is short-lived.
When we left Rhode Island, the biggest emotion I had was just how I had let myself down. I sat down in my seat and I just started to cry. And literally all I could think about is how Peter felt after he betrayed Jesus at the crucifixion, how utterly sad inside because he didn't do what he said he was going to do. I'll never leave you. And I was feeling like I had done that with myself. I had let myself down.
Wilma informs the lawyers that she rejects the settlement. She joins Ron in the Herculean task of preparing their case for a Supreme Court hearing. The workload is intense.
I'm not a lawyer. When I first became aware of this, I didn't even know what a trust was. I had to study the law word by word. I had to study the trust word by word. I had to study the arguments of the lawyers word by word. I had to understand what their arguments were. You know, get all the fluff and obfuscation out of the arguments to just break them down as what is this guy really saying? You know, it was a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of midnight oil burned, a lot of midnight oil, yeah.
Just to do Word documents and type and learn how to type up a brief was an experience in itself. So I had to learn to be a secretary, a lawyer, a paralegal, and I don't know what else, in a few short months.
In the meantime, the stock market starts to plummet, taking the value of Art's trust with it.
With Ron and Wilma holding this up, they actually lost about $400,000 for us that we could have used. But $400,000 is an awful lot of money to just have fly out the window from a trust.
Ultimately, none of us can see the future. I could not be responsible for the crash of the stock market. It was completely unfortunate, but that was too bad that it happened, but it's beyond my control.
But in his battle to get what he felt was just for him, he took away from us.
Ron and Wilma dig up more details about their great-uncle Art in the hope that his story will help their case.
We spent the time going to the city library and looking in every city annal trying to find out anything we could about Art Hadley. We found his obituary. We also found his death certificate.
I knew about his wartime wound of being gassed, but when we read his death certificate and saw all the ailments that he had, actually documented the dates of a lot of those things, it was quite apparent to me that basically after World War I, this was a very sick and injured man.
They believe they are starting to understand their great-uncle's state of mind and his intentions.
He knew he didn't have much time left. So then you realize the urgency in his heart to get everything put together. So by looking at what he left for his wife, and then he left for his children, for his mother, you could see that he was a man who had a very caring purpose in wanting to take care of the family.
When you began to understand who he was as a man and look at what was written, the use of the word issue, remote issue, children of my children, these in law and in history and in any dictionary mean biological descendants.
He thought he knew Uncle Art's intentions. He had no clue because he never met the man. If you don't know somebody, how do you know their intentions?
The cousins are running out of patience. Attorney John Farr proposes a solution. Keep a full 1/11th share for Ron and Wilma to one side, money that will be theirs if they prevail at the Rhode Island Supreme Court. The rest could be distributed amongst the cousins without delay.
What kind of a brilliant thought is that? Because in this way, they wouldn't have to hold up the rest of us getting our money. There was going to be some light at the end of the tunnel. There was going to be a settlement.
Ron and Wilma prepare to stand tall in front of the Supreme Court justices. If they win, they will get a full 1/11th share of the Hadley Trust. If they lose, they will get nothing. But Ron Gay relishes the challenge.
What used to be a United States Marine. I grew up in Idaho, and I've done a lot of hard things in my life. So, if you will, I do hard things. I'm attracted to hard things. Maybe that's the best thing, but if it's hard, it seems like either it finds me or I find it. But it was kind of exciting to me. I really enjoyed the process. I loved the ride, yeah.
John Farr offers them the brief that he's already written, carefully crafted to persuade the court that the two adoptees should be barred from inheriting. But Ron and Wilma decide against using it. They write their own.
The briefs took on a personality of their own that probably a little bit out of the ordinary for what a lot of lawyers would write, but still addressed all the issues of law, language, logic, congruency, and all of that.
To be perfectly candid, I didn't understand Ron's brief. A lot of his brief. And Wilma's, for that matter.
I mean, you can look at it and say, I would have wrote this sentence different, or maybe I should have made a better argument here or whatever. But that was me. So I had no problem expressing my faith in the Lord and that my principles are guided by the Bible.
On March 10, 2008, Ron and Wilma appear at the Rhode Island Supreme Court to argue their case.
The Chief Justice was very polite to the lawyers, actually showed a rudeness to myself. You know, like he very politely asked Mr. Harpootchian, you know, would you tell us who you are, what you do, and why this case is important to you? Then when he did speak to me, it was quite harsh, quite rude. And at that point, I kind of waffled a little bit and my thoughts left my brain. So I think that the cards were stacked against us. Why? I don't know. It's the inner workings of the court and the politics behind the scenes.
It takes less than a month for the court to deliver their judgment, and it's not good news.
I was seriously shocked, disappointed, and surprised that the court would put forth such a poorly written decision with so little analysis. It was like the court studied to find a way to reach a predetermined desired outcome.
The two adopted daughters are awarded approximately 55% of the combined Hadley trusts, worth several $1 million. All the cousins, except Ron and Wilma, will receive inheritances in the six figures.
Even when we first were told we were getting the money, nobody dared to breathe until it was actually there.
John Farr set up accounts with us with Morgan Stanley for each of us cousins. And we could go online. So every day I'd go online and I'd look at my Morgan Stanley account and the balance was zero. But one day I went on the account and the balance was not zero. The balance had six figures in it. I think I screamed.
Oh, it's kind of like the answer to prayers. Pay off a bunch of bills, a few dreams, make them happen. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was really nice. Better than a swift kick in the backside. Would have been better if we'd have gotten it back when Cindy could have enjoyed it also. But apparently it wasn't to be at that point in time.
In December of 2008, Ron Gay appeals the decision to the United States Supreme Court. The appeal is swiftly rejected.
To me, it's just ABC. But how the courts can obfuscate the obvious is just an incredible mystery to me.
You know, it's over with. It's done. You know, signed, sealed, and delivered. But he hasn't let it go yet. But it bugs him because he lost. Like that kid in the sandbox who got his toy taken away from him. He can't play anymore because somebody stole his little scoop shovel thingy that goes with his little bucket. He lost that part of the argument.
Obviously, you know, we can look back and say, you know, I could have made this case better, that case better, maybe brought forth this better, that better, a little different approach here and there. But as far as the journey, the path that I walked, I don't regret it at all.
I am a much richer person because I had to draw from the deepest parts of my wells to figure out who I am and what I could do through this. Did I mean it to be a personal journey? No, but it turned out to be that.
All Art Hadley wanted was to provide for a happy and harmonious future for his family. Instead, this ill-fated fortune tore two generations of Hadleys apart.